Welcome, everybody. I'm Sean Crossan. Really excited to spend some time with you all this morning and talk about the book launch. Um, we have a handful of folks here. It's an open webinar. We've got a fair amount of time slotted at the end to have some discussion, share some questions and answers, and yeah, I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts about the book overall. So. Rough outline for our plan this morning. I'm going to do a quick book introduction, share the structure and the authors of the book, talk about the Haas Center's involvement in the Pathways framework overall, have some discussion about some pathways data, and then an open discussion towards the end. So feel free if you have a question about anything that's being presented to put it in the chat while we're going, and know that we'll have also time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So. Wanted to start off maybe in the chat with just a gauge of folks' familiarity of the Pathways framework. Are you learning about the Pathways framework today? Have you heard about the Pathways framework and you're thinking about implementing it, or are you currently using the Pathways framework and looking forward to learning more about how the book might contribute to your work today? So feel free to put that in the chat. I don't think the poll is. Yeah, feel free to put it in the chat. I don't think I have the poll set up for it. So, be great to see um, where folks are with their familiarity with the Pathways framework, and that'll help guide some of the conversation a little bit later. So, all right. So background on the book. The first notable ideas about this book happened all the way back in 2019. We were at a working group retreat meeting at the Haas Center at Stanford, and kind of brainstorming about what resources, what tools, what things could be useful for folks who are using the Pathways framework. And it was in a group conversation that this idea kind of bubbled up, and that would be really interesting to do a deeper dive and start to create a kind of a profile for the pathways uniquely. So a few years later, we launched a call for research fellows to do a deep dive into each of the 6 pathways. That was a complicating process because, as we know, the pathways overlap and intersect with each other, so it wasn't as easy to kind of examine the pathways discretely than it was to or with simultaneously acknowledging the sort of overlap and intersection of all of these. So after about a year of working with some research fellows, we issued a call for proposals for papers. That was a really broad call, and got quite a few responses of folks both currently using the Pathways framework and contributors who weren't necessarily using the Pathways framework but interested in contributing a chapter to it. And then the next major milestone ended in about May 23, where we completed a series of practitioner advisor checks, and that was specifically on the profiles themselves. So we recognized there was some limitation in building the profiles entirely with what we could find in the literature, and wanted to make sure to really ground it in community perspective and folks that are working within each of the pathways. So those are some of the milestones. There's a little bit more of a narrative in the book about each of those steps and more along the way. But basically, the book is divided into three sections. So the first section is the practitioner's profiles. And this looks at the knowledge, skills, and attributes of each of the 6 profiles. When the skills section is divided into technical and relational skills, and to the idea being that it gives us a deeper way of thinking about what are the ways that students might cultivate their knowledge, skills, and attributes as they relate to each of the 6 pathways. There's also a section in each of the pathways about possible job descriptions, or excuse me, job titles. So we wanted that to be a space where students can kind of think about what careers might look like, or connect with folks who are in careers around each of these pathways. In one draft, we also had a section talking about how looking at disciplines, looking at academic majors through the pathways, and then we actually removed that in a later version because we didn't want a student to think that choosing an academic discipline would exclude or include them necessarily in any of the pathways. So we removed that section for clarity. We very much recognize this as a sort of first contribution to building a larger data set around the pathways, and not necessarily that these are the only knowledge, skills, and attributes that students might engage with in the pathways. So very much hoping this is a work in progress and something that continues to grow over time. The next session is current uses, which is essentially case studies from colleges and universities around the country that are using the Pathways framework, and many of those give a great example of the kind of the large and small ways in which the Pathways framework can be used. So not all of them are completely baked into their institutional approaches for civic engagement. And some of them are very much central to, kind of an institution-wide effort. So, great ways to see how people are using the frameworks, and get ideas for how you might use it on your own campuses. And then the last section we called theoretical, empirical, and critical considerations, as a sort of open-ended opportunity to reflect on what we see as some of the most important considerations moving forward for the Pathways framework. So, and I know we have a handful of our contributors here. I really wanted to take a moment and let everybody who had a chance to contribute a chapter or a section to introduce themselves and just do a quick nod to their chapter, if you will. So I can't see everybody, and so maybe we can just take turns if anybody I know we've got a couple of profile contributors. If folks want to unmute and say hi and say which profile you helped build.
Hey, Sean, it's Nairuti. I'm happy to jump in if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Nairuti Shastri. I started my career in higher education. At Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore City, but have since transitioned to working with the Solidarity and New Economy movement. I currently serve as the Director of Policy and Research at an organization called the Center for Economic Democracy. And I supported with the philanthropy practitioner profile, in which, as Sean mentioned, we talk really about what are some of the skills and attributes that students need in order to kind of enter the career path of philanthropy, whether that be as an individual donor, or as sort of a part of this kind of larger bureaucratic infrastructure that we know is the field of philanthropy. And I think one thing I'll just highlight is that we look at philanthropy pretty robustly and from a more movement left orientation, particularly in terms of its goals as a sector, as well as its sort of political and philosophical orientations in terms of how and why and how much money is being moved into social movements and community organizations. Anything else that's helpful for me to share, Sean?
No, that's perfect. Thanks. You can't give the whole section away, right? They got to read it.
Right, exactly. All right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I see Lisa.
Hi, team. I'm Lisa Moore, she, her. I'm at Northeastern University up in Boston, Massachusetts. I worked on the policy and governance practitioner profile. This one was particularly interesting to me because the very first thing that drew me into Pathways as a framework was when I saw some data presented many, many years ago showing how there was a significant gap in students feeling like policy and governance was a very, very effective method, and thinking that their ability to be effective was very, very low. So that was kind of my initial draw into it. Um, Similarly, the policy and governance section tries to take a bit of a broad view of, yes, policy and governments can be running for a political office, and there are certain attributes and things that would be beneficial to that, but tries to go a little bit broader in policy making happens in most institutions. Shared governance happens in many, many different ways. So trying to break it down a little bit more so that students can see themselves at various levels and find different entry points into the work as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. I don't see Mike. So I think that's it for the profile section. Current uses, I saw a few faces. Kimmy and Luke, would you like to talk about your chapter?
Thank you, Sean. My name is Kemi Oyewole, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. And Luke Tara is the deputy director at the Haas Center for Public Service. And our chapter recounts our experience developing a program for the Otero House, which is a living learning community at Stanford that's oriented towards public service. And the house theme was first introduced by one of our book co-editors, Tom Schnabelt. And so we sort of built on that program that was initially directed towards sophomores and expanded it or revised it such that it would work for students at different points on their service journey. So some students were new to the pathways and service. And so we thought about a sort of tiered approach where they could enter just as explorers all the way up to leadership. And so they could explore the pathways through events and experiential modes of learning. And then we also developed a 1 to 2 unit credit bearing course. And in the course, we introduced the pathways, often one per week, and brought in speakers and readings that allowed students to explore this sort of expansive way of thinking about service. As Lisa sort of alluded to, often they might have narrow views of it. So we sought to broaden that while giving students credit for what can often be challenging to learn in a really busy student schedule. So that is a bit about our chapter.
Wonderful. Thank you. Luke, anything you want to add on chapter? Yeah, great. Vernette, I think I saw, yeah, Vernette, you want to share a little bit about your chapter?
Hi, good morning. Thanks. I'm Burnett Doty, and I'm director of our Community Engagement Center, Leadership Center, and a couple other things on campus. And but those are the ones that fit here. And Andrea and I work together with students, and we're in a relatively new campus we just hit 20 years here in the Central Valley. And while that on one hand sounds like a long time, on the other hand, it's very new to the community. And so we've had a lot of community work to do during the time that I've been here. And so we use the pathways as kind of an opening with our community folks, with our students. We have used it as a platform for our College Core program as it was launched, and have students thinking about, as they go out to all their sites, what that means. And also we established a public service and leadership certificate that students across disciplines can participate in. And that has been probably as we've opened that door, the most students have become involved now as they are aware of that opportunity. And even our School of Engineering is now using that kind of as their, from first year to fourth year, they're getting students involved and helping them kind of understand and connect through the pathways, the different ways that they engage with community. So for us, it's been just a really fun. Like, I remember those early conversations at campus compact meetings talking about the idea of the pathways, and seeing it continue to grow, and to be able to participate in that as it's grown along the way has just been a really wonderful experience. And so I was very grateful to be a part of this. So thanks.
Of course, thank you. Let's see, Sarah, do you want to talk about your chapter?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. My name is Sarah Worley. I'm a faculty member and director of community engaged teaching and learning at Juniata College, which is a small private liberal arts college in rural central Pennsylvania. My co-author was a student, Lillian Case, just graduated from Juniata, and helped me to sort of write the chapter, but has also been helping with some of the self-study work in this community engagement space and the assessment work that we've been doing over the last couple of years. So it was a fun opportunity to co-write with her and to document kind of what's been happening here at Juniata as we implemented a community engaged learning requirement for every student as part of our general education curriculum. The pathways were absolutely integral to our success in being able to do that. It started with attending a campus compact conference and meeting Tom and others from Stanford and saying, oh my gosh, okay, this is cool. Yeah, I'd love to be a part of it. And then realizing that the framework, as much as the tool, could be super, super valuable in helping to create shared language, shared meaning, shared understanding, and a way of capturing and documenting the scope of possibilities for community engagement. And so, yeah, we've integrated the framework, the language into a number of different aspects of our internal systems. And it's really helped to bridge and to cross disciplines and departments to have kind of a shared way of thinking and talking about what we mean, even though we may be doing it differently, what we mean when we say community engagement. So I was grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this project, but even more broadly, just having been professionally and personally a part of this group over the last few years has been so incredibly rewarding and meaningful work that it really it means a lot to me. It's one of the most productive, meaningful groups of folks I've worked with in my entire career. So I really appreciate all the work Sean and others put into bringing this project to fruition. So thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And absolutely, absolutely likewise. Melissa.
Hi, folks. I'm saying good afternoon. I'm joining y'all from the East Coast. I'm in Washington, D.C. I work for Georgetown University. At the time when I wrote this chapter with my colleague Ray Hsu, I was working at our Center for Social Justice. We talked about how we added the Pathways framework into an existing program that had been going on for about 40 years at Georgetown. It was a first-year orientation to community involvement and service program. And what it really allowed us to do is give our students a different way to engage with the sites, with the visits that we were going on. It gave them a way to make deeper meaning. It allowed them to kind of complicate their thinking, and it really matched nicely with our university's Jesuit values and practices that we were already doing. So it was just a really wonderful opportunity to talk about how we think it made our program richer and brought it into a new chapter of its existence. So if you're thinking about, hey, I have something that already exists, and I'm trying to think about how I can map pathways onto it, hope you might consider reading our chapter to learn about how we did that.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. I think that is everyone. If I'm missing somebody, please feel free to unmute and share, but flipping through the attendees, I think that's all of our everybody that was able to join us today. So yeah, to Sarah, to your point, just it's a really remarkable group. Those who contributed chapters and the broader working group absolutely has been. I was thinking about that it's odd for me to claim this as my work because it's very much our work, right? And happy to get to steer the book into existence, but it has certainly been a collaborative and generative process across the time. So I'm going to pass over to Tom and Yiching to talk about the Haas Center's involvement in the origin story of the Pathways framework.
Thanks, Sean. I'll jump in here. I think I might have added a slide, but can you just jump down to the very last slide, which shows the pathways? I think one of the things that I'm realizing is that there are people on the call who don't know what the pathways are. So I don't have a slide. So if folks want to read this while I'm talking, I'm giving a bit of a genesis story, and then I'm going to turn it over to Yi Cheng to talk a little bit about the Haas Center and its current work. Let me first say, Sean, I love that Lisa just said you've been a great captain to steer us, because this morning when I got up, I thought, Sean did a remarkable job. And the metaphor that I had, and I hope our contributors don't take offense to my sort of saying this, but Sean has been Noah and kind of getting all of these pieces onto the ark. I realize I just basically referred to all the contributors as animals, but Sean, I just want to say it's been a truly remarkable effort. And I'm remembering the time when you brought this to the group, and yeah, I'm so glad that it's come to fruition. I'll say a little bit about how the framework came to be, and then turn it over to Yi Ching. The framework really came out of a couple of challenges that we were experiencing and observing in the work that we were doing. The first, I'll just name three. One of the challenges was that people weren't understanding our work, whether there were students or my parents. The idea of public service is really complicated. It has lots of possible meanings, and whether you use public service or civic engagement or service learning or any of that. The real thing for us at the Haas Center for Public Service is that we weren't solely about civil service, but that's often what people were confusing it with. And that was certainly part of it, but we were broader than that. The second thing is that there had been, and this is actually sort of coming out of the 1980s and 90s, this notion of like, you would say things like, well, it's change, not charity. And it was like this dichotomous thinking about like what we were trying to do. And that dichotomous thinking oversimplified things, and it oversimplifies the way that humans engage in social change. It was sort of treating it like it's a spigot that you turn on or off, and it's really kind of ignoring some of the complexities in the work. The third thing is that there were some observed patterns among students that were shared among a lot of people. And we share a couple of those stories in the book. The one that I'll just say is like Andy the Angular was the one that we included in the introduction. This was a student that was really deeply invested in their identity of being a social entrepreneur, but was sort of blind to a lot of different other ways that they could be engaged in social change. And in fact, not just blind, but actually in some ways hostile to other ways of engaging. And that's not to pick on social entrepreneurship as a way, but it just illustrated we needed to do some work to kind of complicate the ways in which people do social change. So we ended up engaging with our colleagues at UC Berkeley's Public Service Center and St. Mary's College of California, the LaSallian Social Action Center for Social Action. And we tried to identify some shared language initially. We did that, and then from there the circle widened, and I see Christy Lobo on the call. Christy started to sort of say, well, what kind of things could we do to help advise students and kind of understand their initial awareness of these things? So she built an early version of the diagnostic tool. Then the working group got formed around that, and then the circle just kept widening to more and more campuses. And I think, Sean, you were at one of the 2019 meeting where we were like, okay, let's really form this working group. And before I turn it over to Yi Ching to say a little bit about the Haas Center, I just want to build some other acknowledgments into this. First is the acknowledgement that this pathways framework builds upon a lot of other amazing work. I think we relied a lot on, many of you have probably read Joe Kahn and Joel Westheimer's What Kind of Citizen, where they talked about personally responsible citizen, participatory citizen, and justice-oriented citizens. Minnesota Campus Compact had the social change wheel. There were a number of other things that were out there. What we wanted to do was kind of create something that was a little bit of a meta typology that, to be honest, had enough things that we could all remember. Like a few enough things. So 6 became our number. I also just want to acknowledge the work that Christy Lobo, I mentioned her earlier today, Annabelle Wong, Joe Wong, I see Gail Robinson on here, her work to help us really think about community colleges and making sure that this framework was speaking to all ages and types of institutions, ages of students and types of institutions. And Devony Hellman, who was a graduate student who helped in the very early stages. So anyway, just want to give shout outs to folks that were involved. And I'm going to turn it over with great pleasure to Yi Ching Ong, the executive director of the Haas Center for Public Service.
Thank you so much, Tom. And I just want to echo folks on this call with beginning with just huge congratulations and kudos to the organizers and authors here, and a lot of gratitude for just the chance to be in community together as folks who are all, in higher education trying to do this work during what is a really tough time to do this work. But absolutely, an essential time to be supporting students for lives of meaningful contribution and helping to broaden their horizons around what that looks like. And, just that last piece of really kind of helping students to think about, what does this meaningful work look like in a way that can be, how do we prepare for it in rigorous ways, is what really drew me to the Pathways framework. So I first encountered it before I had joined the Haas Center. I was at Princeton's Pace Center at the time. I see Alex is here. And I had been in contact with Tom, and some folks at the Haas Center had heard about this framework and was just really excited about what it represented. So I actually came to that November 2019 working group that launched the idea of this book. So I love seeing that it's really full circle and the book is now out in the world. And, at the time, it was just a really fruitful experience for me to interact with all of the folks, with Christy and everyone that had been thinking really deeply about how to make this framework rigorous and accessible and comprehensive, but also just really practical. This is something that we'd been really grappling with within our work at Princeton. How do we help students think about what public service or civic engagement is without sort of resorting to their own kind of stereotypes or high school ideas around what community service or public service entails? And, of course, we had leaned on tools like Campus Compact Social Change Wheel, but, there's like 35 things in that. And so, we're just trying to figure out some way to make it more memorable and tractable for students. So the pathways being those very clear, distinct 6 categories that, nevertheless kind of represent a really broad swath of ways to make societal change just made so much sense to me. And I've really enjoyed seeing how it's developed since then. So I came to the Haas Center 2 years ago, and it has just been a joy and a privilege to work with the amazing team here, with Clayton and Christy and Luke and all of the folks that have been, involved in this since its inception. And the pathways continue to be a really central piece of how we operate across all of our programs. And we regularly elevate the pathways as one of our 2 foundational frameworks whenever we talk about sort of the work that we do, what we mean by rigorous public service and learning about public service. So we put the pathways alongside our principles of ethical and effective service. And I think it really helps us, push back in explicit and concrete ways against, what Tom alluded to, these sort of narrower narratives that students or external audiences often hold around what public service is and what it looks like for students to do this work or how they prepare for it. So I want to just give a couple of examples. So we use this in many, many ways across our programs. One way is that we have a large course called Pathways to Purposeful Careers. It's open to all Stanford students. It's very much geared towards helping them explore how to translate their interests, skills, and values into careers in public service and social impact. So we usually get around over 100 students per year. And as we do this, we try and touch on a range of different issue areas, health, education, sustainability, et cetera, but across a range of different roles. So we're not only bringing in folks from government and public policy, we're trying to kind of cover that pathways breadth of thinking about, how are different people working for social change through advocacy, through research, all of those different pieces. I want to briefly highlight too, and Kemi spoke to this earlier, but the work that Luke and Kemi have done to integrate the pathways really deeply into the public service residential living learning community that we have on campus, this dorm called Otero. And, you know, there I think they've done a really beautiful job of integrating the pathways throughout so that it can be a reference point for students to keep coming back to. So it's an organizing principle for the course that they lead that blends facilitated conversations, skill building sessions, and guest speakers. And it's also, they use that diagnostic tool that was developed by this group to create an opening for discussions for students. And that has been a really powerful way to help students explore and keep coming back to it as they, you know, continue to orient and learn more about how they want to develop in public service. And then, of course, you know, we just use it throughout our advising structure, throughout our strategic planning as we continue to look at our programs and opportunities and just ask, you know, how are we being responsive to student interests and needs, and how are we displaying really the full breadth of opportunities across these pathways. So I'm thrilled to see the Pathways framework continue to thrive. And it's really inspiring to hear all of the different ways that folks here are you continuing to use it in your programming. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Annabelle to share a bit more of the data.
Good. Thank you, Ching. And thank you, everyone. I know I am. I'm sure we're all thrilled that you could attend and join us today. My name is Annabelle Wong. I have been involved with the Pathways Project for 10 years. 10 years ago, I walked into John's office and we started talking about this project, just for me to get involved along with Devaney. And so my area is the diagnostic survey, building on Christie's original prototype, which is now administered all over the country by participating campuses in our working group. The uses and the users, as you heard, vary a lot from the entire incoming Frosh class at some campuses to one course for students in a particular program or a live-learn community like at Stanford. Today, I'll show a few sections of the survey and then the accompanying aggregated results, whether that's from one school year for some or over time for others. And because many of you are not familiar or, you know, are just coming to the pathways, I thought it'd be a good idea to go through the survey in some form. Thanks, John. All right, so this is the first question that respondents see when they access the survey. This is where they can select which activities are interesting to them without being told the associated pathway. So this first question kind of dissociates the pathways specifically. Naturally, it's not too hard to guess if you are at all familiar with the framework, but it does nonetheless give us a glimpse into respondent preference and how much they can imagine themselves doing particular activities. Thank you. And this is data from the 2023-24 academic year, specifically for this example activities question. So we had about 3,500 aggregate users from across maybe 30 institutions. And here I have each of the activity and its associated pathway in short form. So maybe I'll go through that too. But the broadest example activity, the first one, volunteer your time to help on a local project you care about, which we associate on the back end with the direct service pathway, was perhaps not surprisingly selected most frequently by 73% of those who responded. And this is very consistent across time where we've had this question. And then on the other side, reviewing literature was the least frequently selected, which may be worrying for the next generation of academics. But I should note that usually about over half of the sample consists of Frosh students. So yeah, that preference could change over time and with influence at college or university. We next ask students to share their own top 3 issues of concern for their campus, their local region or community, and then the world more broadly. Those in their own words. And then I theme that data. And again, from 23-24, here are the most common themes for issues facing the world. You see that environment or climate, poverty, and conflict or war are the most common concerns among the people who responded. The next question, respondents choose a topic area that determines what examples they receive in the survey that follows. So whether they'll see donate to a charity drive for adolescent programming, or PTSD treatment for veterans, or backyard composting programs. So whatever might be relevant to their own service experience. We have, what do we have here? General. This is for people maybe who don't have a lot of specific service experiences, and then diversity, equity, inclusion, education and youth development, environmental sustainability, health, and human services. And then again, 23, 24, for which topic best aligns with their service experiences. About a quarter, 23%, select education and youth development. And the rest are divided fairly evenly across the other 5 topics, which I guess may not be surprising, but it's also kind of interesting. And I think it's interesting to ask as well, if we had the opportunity, which topic would you most want to have experiences in? And then, how much overlap would there be with their issues of concern, whether on campus, local region, or the world? The largest part of the survey, and the one that's been a part of the survey the longest, is the section that consists of 4 questions for each of the 6 pathways. So that's 24 questions in total. The questions touch on how much experience, how much interest, what is your personal, how much impact do you personally think you could have? And then in general, how much impact do you think this pathway has? And the options are none, very little, some, and a lot. It's not a lot of granularity, but it has been consistent across all the years of the survey tool, which makes it easy to compare. This is a dense graph. I will break it down. These are the percentages of all the respondents who say some or a lot, who respond that way, to how much interest you have in exploring this pathway during college. And the pathways themselves are in different colors. And I've added little markers at the end for each of the lines. Direct service has always received the most, some and a lot responses among the pathways. And this is something that I feel like can be kind of triangulated based on the example activities. Direct service is the most appealing. I think students probably have the most experience with it, whether coming in or leaving college and university. Similarly, policy and governance has always received the fewest responses of some and a lot, with a relatively limited change over time in this period of 2015-16 to 2023-24. And it peaked in 2018-2019. And then, as Lisa mentioned earlier when she talked about the policy and governance profile, I haven't included the graph for the level of impact that students perceive for each of the pathways, but they're generally all pretty high. But the interest in some of these pathways, in doing it themselves and engaging themselves, is relatively low. As you can see, policy and governance, even social entrepreneurship and corporate social responsibility has stayed relatively low. So we can see that the community organizing and activism received probably like the second most responses of some and a lot in 2020, 2021, perhaps connected to a particularly eventful year. Community-engaged learning and research has taken its place in frequency response, in spite of, if you recall, the low popularity of reviewing literature. So this is another kind of interesting tidbit that's emerged over time, is that students are expressing more relative interest in community-engaged learning and research, but less interest in doing activities that we would associate with community-engaged learning and research. And of course, it's not, we don't list all of the potential activities for community-engaged learning and research, but it is interesting to think about what aspects maybe on the back end we associate with that pathway, and what students might be interpreting or receiving in their lived experiences. And the last 2 pages of questions ask about which pathways the respondents are most likely to explore after college, whether they participated in a workshop about the pathways, and finally, a battery of optional demographic questions. And this is an example of the results that a student might receive. This is randomly generated at the end. They see their answers from the dimension section and also from the example activity section, here presented with the pathway. And one of the questions for reflection is whether there are differences in the responses to the specific activities versus when the pathways are presented to them. Yeah, interesting area for reflection and contemplation. So I presented a selection of the data we collect through the Pathways survey that is administered via our working group members every year. I'd say the most interesting part of looking at this data is viewing it through the different sections. Respondent experience seems to be most commonly in education and youth development, but their main issues of concern, at least at the world level, are in environment and poverty and conflict and war. And respondents select philanthropic activities relatively frequently before they know the associated pathway. But then the interest in philanthropy as a pathway is quite middling compared to the others. And respondents select community engaged learning and research activities the least, but consider themselves quite interested in that pathway, as I mentioned earlier. So all that is interesting to me. I think that the individual campuses can also have a chance to compare their results both to the aggregate and within their own data set of students and investigate relevant questions. The working group is a great community to bring those questions to discuss. And yeah, I'll do a quick plug now for the working group where I share these results every year. We'd love to have you. You can reach out. Yeah, thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Annabelle. So we have a few minutes here. I want to give two more quick acknowledgments. One to Clayton Hurd, who really shepherded the editorial process of the book through all of it. And yeah, grateful for all the support there. Nicole just put the link in the chat to the book itself. And then the other, we just missed Will Brummett, who was on the call for a little bit, but had to step off. Will is the facilitator for the working group that we've mentioned so many times. And I'm going to put a link in the chat for anybody who's interested in joining the working group. It is for free opportunity for members of Campus Compact. It's also one of institutions who are not members of Campus Compact can also join the working group. So it's not required that you be a member of Campus Compact to join the working group, but it is a free opportunity. And as you've heard from many of us, just an all-around amazing group of folks that are doing really meaningful and fulfilling work. So we have a few minutes. We'd love to open up to questions, to comments, reactions. I know from the chat there were several folks who had said learning about the Pathways framework today. So maybe for those who are just learning about the Pathways framework today, a prompting question might be, how might you hope to use the Pathways framework, or what other resources might be useful in implementing the Pathways framework? And for those of you that are currently using, maybe any reactions to what we've presented about the book today and how it might contribute to your work on campus. So happy to open the floor. Keep an eye on the chat if there's questions, comments, reactions that folks have.
Just a quick shout out to my co-authors who put together those amazing profiles. I can't wait to put those into the field with students. I feel like that's a huge gap in how we talk about it. It's just having some real depth and bringing the kind of fullness of what that can look like in the world. So just really appreciated that contribution, and Sean and others for including that as a component of the book, because I just can easily see how to bring that into conversation with our students. So thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for saying so, Luke, and excited to see how those build and grow along the way, right? That we're, as the sort of the first offering of of this knowledge, skills, and attributes. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for saying so. Stephanie's making a great point in the chat. If you have the opportunity to get your campus library to get a copy, that's a great way to really broaden, who might have access to the book. If it's if the library can get a digital copy, then you can have faculty really easily plug it into their classes, and students not have to buy the book. Obviously, happy to sell the book, but also really want the work out there, right? So thanks for bringing that up, Stephanie.
Sean, I just want to point out, Tiffany says that the book is still out of stock. I don't know if Clayton or you have any information about that.
They print those on demand and they can do it within a couple days. So I'm surprised they're out of stock, but that doesn't mean they'll be out for very long. Once they reprint, they're able to send them right away. But I'll double check to make sure there's some available immediately.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Tiffany. Other reactions or what questions about implement for those that are new to the Pathways framework? Anything that you're particularly excited about trying to implement on your campuses?
I'll chime in. I began as a postdoctoral fellow at the UPenn Graduate School of Education. And it's been really interesting as the School of Education thinks about expanding its undergraduate course offerings, how these pathways might speak to students who have this interest in education. Annabelle pointed out quite a few do, but also not sort of restrict them in their notions of service and how education can be an entry point to other pathways. And so I think that's been an interesting frame that I'm always so excited to share with faculty and staff. And I'm hoping that it can make more students excited about my discipline, education, but thinking about it as a pathways to a broader world of engagement and care for the greater good.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the, I think the underlying, goals of the framework is to, bring more people into the work, right? Not less. It's never not about exclusion or rank or There's always the conversations about what's your favorite pathway or your least favorite pathway, and it's like that's not really So yeah, thanks for saying so. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say is I think the most commonly asked question is like, what pathway should people be in? And I think it's always interesting to try to answer that question with a non-answer because that's the way you should answer that question. The other thing I wanted to mention, and forgive me, I'll be self-promotional for just a second, but we've actually in January of 2026, we're going to be launching a new tool. We're calling it the Civic Profile. And you can think of this as like a civics Myers-Briggs, like answering the question. It's a self-assessment of your sort of approach to your own citizenship. And it's looking at knowledge, values, and behaviors. For the values piece, we're really kind of having people explore the enduring civic tensions. So it's not normative, but the civic tensions that we all wrestle with. And then for the behaviors piece, we actually leaned in a little bit to the pathways framework of sort of trying to figure out like using the pathways framework as sort of a way of thinking about civic behaviors. So I'm excited, and if you want to learn more, ping me. It'll be out in January.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Okay, I think we're right at time. And so just one more quick nod. If folks are planning on going to Compact 26 in Chicago, we will have a pre-conference around the book and the larger working group. So a great opportunity for those that are interested in using it, those that are currently using it. So be on the lookout when the Compact 26 registration comes through to catch the pre-conference. So Thanks again, everybody, for being here. Great to spend an hour with you all, and we'll have a few more webinars in the spring semester, starting in January, that do a more focused look at each of the sections. So you'll get a chance to hear even more from some of the current uses and from some of the authors of the critical considerations chapters. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.